Hi guys, what is up? I'm back with the second part on Aron Nimzowitsch My System. And just for a review of the first part, we basically did an introduction on who Aron Nimzowitsch was. And I also did an introduction on the book itself, My System by Aron Nimzowitsch. Towards the end of the video, we discussed a few concepts explained by Nimzowitsch, including a couple of definitions, that of a frontier line and a midpoint. And then we discussed a couple of illustrations, a sequence of moves given by Nimzowitsch regarding development and center. And we basically learned that the key during early stages of the game is speed in development. So today we are going to continue from where we left off in the first part. And I will begin this second part with another short quote, and that's a quote as in a saying and not the one that you were inventors. And the quote is, "Play to play well and not to win." Now, regarding the origins of this quote, a while back I used to trade commodities as in gold, silver, oil. I don't do that anymore, but back when I used to do that, I came across a quote on the internet. I forgot the name of the website, but the quote was, "Trade to trade well and not to make money." Now, me being someone who has a deep passion for chess and I play it very regularly, I sort of transformed that quote into play to play well and not to win. Now, if you think about it for a second, it is true. More often than not, we are concerned with the outcome of the game when we are playing chess. Am I going to win? Am I going to lose? Am I playing in a tournament? Oh my God, so many people are watching me. It's going to be embarrassing if I lose. Is there a prize involved? How much money am I going to get if I win this game? And even when we are not playing in tournaments and we are just playing casual chess like online blitz, we are concerned with the outcome of the game constantly. Like me, if I'm playing someone who is higher rated than me, then sometimes I would start thinking that oh my God, this guy is just too tough. He's higher rated than me, and I probably won't win this game, and I will sort of put myself in that depressive mode throughout that game, and that will that sort of thinking will affect the quality of my moves. And similarly, if I play someone who is lesser rated than me, then sometimes I start thinking, oh my God, I absolutely need to win this game. This guy is much lesser rated than me. It's going to be embarrassing if I lose. And I sort of put myself in that situation where I absolutely have to win, and that's a lot of pressure. And that also affects the quality of your moves. So by basically focusing on the outcome of the game, you let your emotions affect the quality of your moves. But if you try to follow this saying, play to play well and not to win, you basically throw out all the negative emotions associated with the outcome of the game, and you simply focus on playing well and on the quality of your moves. Now, it's easier said than done, I know, and I'm not saying that I'm someone who has mastered this saying, because I haven't. It's simply a saying that I try to follow, and sometimes I feel I succeed at it somewhat. At other times, I just fail miserably. I make horrible blunders, and just like everybody else, I have my bad days. But the times that I do succeed somewhat at following this saying, I personally feel that is when I play the best possible chess that I can play. And sometimes I just play inspired chess, and I'm able to beat opponents much higher rated than me. And I just surprise myself even. And I'm sure most of you also go through this, fantasy phase where you are playing the best chess that you can play, and you are sort of in that zone making all the right moves, and you're happy with your game. So this is just a saying that I try to follow, play to play well and not to win, and I just thought it would be nice to share it with you. So moving on with part 2 of Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. Now, in case you missed out on the first part, you can always go to my channel on YouTube and catch up. And the theme for today's part is going to be exchange of material, exchange of pieces, and pieces as in pawns and your minor and heavy pieces. When is it right to exchange material and when is it wrong to exchange material? And Nimzowitsch gives 2 scenarios where you should exchange material in his book, My System. So we are going to be discussing that today. Now, before we begin, let me remind you, we are still in the very early stages of the book. We are still doing the first section, which is called the elements. The elements is further divided into 9 additional parts, like I mentioned before, of which the first is on the center and development, and we are still doing on the center and development, and we probably will still be doing this in the next part of this video series as well. So still in the very early stages of the book. Anyways, moving on, Nimzowitsch further writes, to be ahead in development is the ideal to be aimed at, and he explains this with the help of an example. If I were running a race with someone, it would be, to say the least, inopportune were I to throw away valuable time by rubbing, say, a smut of my nose, or like blowing your nose, although I must not be considered as criticizing that operation in itself. If, however, I can induce my opponent to waste time by some similar action, I should then get an advantage in development over him. Explaining in chess terms, Nimzowitsch writes that the repeated moving to and fro of the same piece would be described as an action of this kind. Accordingly, we force our opponent to lose time if we make a developing move which at the same time attacks one of his pieces which he has already moved. This very typical situation arises in the following illustration, and here Nimzowitsch gives a sequence of moves to explain this concept. So I've loaded this sequence on the analysis board, so we can just get into the moves of this sequence, and this is from the Scandinavian variation of the game. So e4, d5 by black, putting one of its pawns in the center. White takes on d5 here, and if black captures this pawn on d5 with its queen, then in this position white has a move possible that is going to be both a developing move for white as well as one which is going to threaten this black queen, forcing it to move twice during the early stages of the game, which is generally not recommended. So if you would like to spot that move, you can go ahead and pause the video. I'll give you a few seconds. And the move is, of course, knight to c3, which is both a developing move for white as well as one which threatens this black queen on d5. And the common moves in this position for black involve moving the queen to a5, or you can move it back to d6 like in the Schiller variation. You can even go for a full retreat variation where you go back to the square where you started your queen from to d8. And even though this is a variation that is quite commonly played, and I have personally come across a lot of opponents that like to play this variation as black, it was considered as inferior play by Nimzowitsch because this allows white to develop one of its pieces at the cost of black losing a tempo on its queen. So there you go. And now Nimzowitsch discusses regarding exchanges. So now we are moving towards the theme of the day, and Nimzowitsch gives 2 scenarios when you should exchange material, of which the first scenario is an exchange with a resulting gain of tempo over your opponent. When you see that you are going to gain tempos over your opponent by exchanging, then you should exchange. And in order to explain this concept, Nimzowitsch gives a few illustrations. So the first of which I will load for you on the analysis board right now. And there we go, that should be fine. Alright, d4, d5, c4, going into the queen's gambit variation. And now knight f6 by black, which is the martial defense. And white takes on d5. And if now black takes this pawn with its queen on d5, then again white has the move knight to c3, which is both a developing move as well as one which threatens this black queen. As such, white will win a tempo on the queen, over here. And in case black decides to take this pawn on d5 with its knight instead of the queen, then yet again in this position white has a move which will both help in its development as well as threaten this piece on d5. So if you would like to spot that move, I will give you a few seconds. And the move is e4, and this now threatens this knight on d5, which will now be forced to move possibly to b6. And this knight has now moved like 3 times, first to f6, then to d5, and finally to b6. And while black was busy doing that, white was able to build this strong pawn center by having these pawns on d4 and e4. And this is something that is also advocated by Nimzowitsch. If you recall, we discussed this in the first part, that in order to proceed with your development, first you must build a pawn center. So in this situation, white was able to do that at the cost of black moving just one of its pieces repeatedly. And then the second illustration given by Nimzowitsch regarding this concept of exchanging with the resulting gain of tempo, I will load that on the analysis board for you right now. Alright, there we go. So e4, e5, f4 by white, so going into the king's gambit variation. And now knight f6 by black. And an exchange is possible for white here, which will help in gaining tempos over its black opponent. And the move is f takes on e5. And this now threatens the knight on f6. As such, knight takes on e4. And even though black gets back the material that it lost, which was just a pawn, this knight now sits in a compromised square on e4, from where it can easily be threatened by white's pieces. So first, knight f3 by white, stopping any queen to h4 ideas, which is going to be uncomfortable for white to say the least. And now if black goes for a move like knight to c6, then white simply plays d3, and this now threatens the knight on e4. As such, knight to c4, c5, but now d4 by white, and this now threatens that knight yet again. So knight to e4, and now d5, threatening black's other knight on c6, and for lack of a better square, knight to b8, which is an underdeveloped move. And now bishop to d3. And this knight, I think, has moved like 4 or 5 times. First it moved f6, then it moved to e4, then it moved to c5, and then back to c4. So that's like losing 4 tempis on one piece for black, and 5 if you count this move where it retreated its other knight. And in the meantime, look at white's position. It's got this knight developed on f3, it's got this bishop developed on d3, it's got a strong pawn center, and then this knight is yet again threatened, so black will likely lose yet another tempo. And white is just far ahead in development, and it was able to do that at the cost of black repeatedly losing tempos on one of its pieces. And in this position, Nimzowitsch gives yet another move for white, Instead of bishop to d3, white can develop its queenside knight to d2. And in case black decides to exchange over here, then simply bishop takes on d2. And regarding this exchange, Nimzowitsch gives a colorful example. When a farmer loses a sucking pig through illness, he mourns not only the little pig, but also the good food he has gambled on it. So, according to Nimzowitsch, this black knight that was just taken off the board, that was exchanged, is like a little pig. And the black player is like the farmer which invests in this little pig by feeding him every day. But just before he can actually profit from the pig becomes ill and dies. And then this knight is just like that little pig. And the black player, as the farmer, invested like 4 or 5 moves in this knight, and finally it was exchanged and taken off the board. So now the black player will not only rue the fact that he invested 4 or 5 moves in this knight, but also the fact that the knight is simply exchanged and taken off the board. And then Nimzowitsch writes that an intermezzo is possible in the same illustration. He gives an intermezzo variation of the same illustration. An intermezzo is an in-between move. And Nimzowitsch writes that an intermezzo for black is possible in this illustration, but it's nothing that white should be worried about. So I will load this intermezzo variation for you on the analysis board right now. Alright, so basically the first few moves are the same: e4, e5, f4, but now d5 instead of knight to f6. And white takes on d5. Black takes with its queen on d5, and again white has the move knight to c3, which is both a developing move as well as one which is going to win a tempo on the black queen. The queen to e6, pawn takes on e5, and even though black takes on e5 with its queen, and this now gives a check to the white king, Nimzowitsch writes regarding this move that this is nothing but an intermezzo, and white does not need to be worried about this, because now white has the move bishop to e2, developing its light squared bishop. So bishop to g4 by black, and white cannot capture this bishop because it is right now being pinned to the defense of its king by the black queen. So the correct move for white will be d4 here. This now threatens this queen on d5 yet again. So bishop takes on e2, knight takes on e2 by white, developing its kingside knight. And in case you are thinking of the move pawn takes on d5, then this is inferior play, because now black has the move bishop takes on d1, and white will lose a tempo if it decides to take this bishop with its knight. It's moving your knight for the second time, and in case you take this bishop with the king, then it's just bad, because now the king loses castling rights. So the correct move is knight takes on e2, and this now renews the threat on this black queen on e5. So white will win yet another tempo on the black queen. So queen to e6, and now simply castling by white. And this queen has moved like 3 or 4 times, and if you take a look at both sides' position, white has got both of its knights developed. It's got a pawn in the center. The king is castled into safety, and in comparison black has got just this queen developed on e6, and the rest of its pieces are just sitting at the back, without being developed. And even in this position, white has got moves like knight f4 or d5, which is going to gain further tempos on the black queen. So black's problems are not yet over. 3 tempi gained on black's queen, which will likely be compounded later on as the black queen is forced to run around again. And now Nimzowitsch gives the second scenario for exchanging material. The second scenario when you should exchange material. And that second scenario, according to Nimzowitsch, is liquidation with consequent development or disembarrassment. When you see that you are going to be embarrassed on the upcoming moves by your opponent, then in order to avoid that situation, you should go for exchanges. Or in other words, when you see that you are the one that is going to be losing tempos against your opponent, then in order to avoid losing those tempos, you can go for certain exchanges. And regarding this concept, Nimzowitsch writes, when a merchant sees that his business is not succeeding, he does well to liquidate it, so as to invest the proceeds in a more promising one. Translated into terms of chess, I mean by this that when one's development is threatened with being held up, one must adopt a radical cure and on no account try to remedy matters by palliative measures. Palliative means pain relieving measures. So, it's like as if, God forbid, you are suffering from a disease and you keep on taking painkillers, then those painkillers are only going to take the pain away but not actually cure the disease. What you need to go for is a radical cure to eliminate the disease altogether. Translating that into chess terms, Nimzowitsch gives an illustration over here. So I am going to load this next illustration for you on the analysis board. Alright, here we go. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now d4. So we are going into the Scotch game, and this is an opening that I actually plan to do the first part of a new series that I'm planning to start on my channel regarding openings, and the first part I thought of doing on the Scotch game. So that is something to look forward to. So anyways, moving on, d5 now by black. And regarding this move, Nimzowitsch writes that it is perhaps a little too aggressive and one which black could have avoided. But now since black has played it, let's see what happens. Pawn takes on d5, queen takes on d5. And now if white goes for the move knight to c3, which is again, both a developing move as well as one which threatens this queen. Black has the move bishop to b4 for the time being, pinning this knight to the defense of its king, and since this is an absolute pin, the knight cannot immediately capture the black queen on d5. So for the time being, black is saved from being embarrassed. Black has still not lost a tempo on its queen. But after the move bishop to d2, this now renews the threat on this queen, and black in this position has a choice to make. Does it lose a tempo on its queen, or is there a move possible to prevent that loss of tempo? If you would like to spot the correct move, I will give you a few seconds. And the move is of course to go for an exchange according to the concept that we are discussing, which is of liquidation. Bishop takes on c3, eliminating the attacker of the queen. And now bishop takes on c3 by white. And now black goes for a full liquidation by exchanging further, taking on d4. Knight takes on d4 by white. And now black can proceed with its development by playing knight to f6, making room for its king to castle. And in case in this position, if you were thinking about the move e4, then regarding this particular move, Nimzowitsch writes that black has got no time for this, brought its queen out into the open a little too early. And white over here can simply play knight to e5, and after knight takes e5, pawn takes on e5. Black has to exchange queens here, otherwise it will lose another tempo on the queen. Queen takes on d1, rook takes on d1, and in this position white has this nice open fire being controlled by its rook on d1. It's got a bishop developed on c3, which is protecting this pawn on e5. And in comparison, black has got this vulnerable pawn on e4, and the rest of its pieces are still not developed. So white is much better over here, and black has got no time for moves like e4. Instead, the correct continuation here to go for a further exchange. And in this position, Nimzowitsch writes that black is now fine. After making that aggressive move, it was able to compensate for that by going for certain exchanges. And now Nimzowitsch gives a couple of examples with the same illustration, a couple of variations with the same illustration, how not to play as black. So I am going to load the first of that variation for you on the analysis board. Here we go. First few moves are the same: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, the Scotch game, and d5 by black. But now instead of pawn takes on d5, if white goes for the move bishop to b5, this now pins this knight to the defense of its king, and it creates a threat of knight takes on e5 by white on the upcoming move, and black needs to do something about this. And in case black decides to go for the move bishop to d7, then according to Nimzowitsch, this is an inaccuracy, because after pawn takes on d5, knight takes on d4, bishop takes on d7 check, queen takes on d7, knight takes on d4, pawn takes on d4, and queen takes on d4, and white goes up a pawn. And not only that, it's got a pawn in the center which it will be able to support by a move like c4 later on. And in comparison, black has just got the queen developed, so black has basically got nothing to show for the pawn that it just lost. So this is not the right way to play as black. And the second variation that Nimzowitsch gives of how not to play as black in this illustration, I will load that on the analysis board for you. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, d5, bishop to b5. And now if black goes for the move bishop to g4 instead of bishop to d7, then even this is an inaccuracy, because now white has h3, forcing this bishop to take this knight. The other move, moving the bishop to h5, is simply answered by g4, and white just goes up a pawn and then has a serious attack on this square on c6. So black takes on f3, queen takes on f3, knight to f6 by black, and now pawn takes on d5, and black cannot immediately capture this pawn, otherwise it will simply lose its e-pawn, because after a move like queen takes on d5, white simply trades off queens, knight takes on d5, and then white can capture this e5 pawn, because this knight is pinned and cannot defend this pawn. And even if black decides to take this pawn with its knight, then simply pawn takes on e5, and white goes up a pawn. So first e4 by black, queen to e3, queen takes on d5, but now white has the move c4. And regarding this position, Nimzowitsch writes, white has decided advantage as black's game is insecure, also gains a tempo as black will now be forced to move its queen again. And this pawn move now threatens this queen on d5. It also supports this bishop. So white is better here. And now Nimzowitsch gives a couple of examples with the same illustration on how to proceed as black. I'm going to load this first variation for you on the analysis board. This is how to play as black. This illustration. Alright, we go. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, D5, bishop to B5, and the correct move for black is to go for an exchange, taking on E4. And since this now threatens the knight on F3, knight takes, E5, and now black can play the move bishop to D7. Bishop takes on C6, bishop takes on C6 by black, castling by white, bishop to D6, attacking this strong knight on E5, knight takes on C6, pawn takes on C6, and black ends up with these doubled up pawns, which is a weakness. But after the move knight to C3, black has F5, and regarding this position, Nimzowitsch writes that black is fine here. And you can see that white has got one minor piece developed, and in comparison black has also got its dark squared bishop developed, which is eyeing this h2 pawn. And even though the black king has yet to castle, it's got a relatively stronger pawn center as compared to. So black is fine according to Nimzowitsch, this variation. And then the second variation of how to play as black of this illustration, Nimzowitsch, I'm gonna load this variation for you right now. Here we go. Right, E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, D5, bishop to B5, pawn takes on E4, knight takes on E5, bishop to D7, bishop takes on C6, bishop takes on C6 by black. And now instead of castling, if white decides to attack this pawn on E4 by developing its queenside knight to C3, black has the move bishop to B4, pinning that knight. After castling, bishop takes on C3, eliminating the attacker. Pawn takes on C3, knight to E7, queen to F4, eyeing this loose pawn on G7, castling by black, knight takes on C6, knight takes on C6 by black, queen takes pawn on E4, but now black has rook F to E8, threatening the queen, queen to F3, and now knight A5 by black. And regarding this position, Nimzowitsch writes, although black loses a pawn but gets compensation by seizing the E file with its rook. You see this black rook on E8 is now controlling this nice open juicy looking file, and that is compensation for the pawn that it just lost. And not only that, black can proceed to occupy white's weak squares like C4 and D5. These squares have become weak for white since it's got these doubled up pawns on the C file, and then this square on C4 can be targeted by black's knight, which can then be supported by a move like B5. Similarly, the square on D5 can later on be occupied by its queen, supported by its queenside rook. So black has a certain amount of compensation in the form of development for the pawn that it lost. And Nimzowitsch further writes, thus timely liquidation has brought back into the right track the second player's questionable development. That D5 move that black played initially is questionable, but because of the right exchanges, black was able to save itself from losing tempos against white. And that is what this concept is all about: going for liquidation, exchanging in order to get yourself out of a difficult situation. And then Nimzowitsch gives a couple more illustrations to explain this concept of liquidation. So I'm going to load this first illustration for you on the analysis board. Alright, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5. So going into the Italian variation of the game, c3, knight to f6 by black, d4 by white, pawn takes on d4, pawn takes on d4, and this now threatens this black bishop on c5. As such, bishop to b4, check by black, bishop to d2, and in case black goes for the move d5 over here, then according to Nimzowitsch this is an inaccuracy, because now white has pawn takes d5, knight takes on d5, bishop takes on b4 by white, knight takes on b4, and now after the move queen to b3. Regarding this position, Nimzowitsch writes that white is slightly better as compared to black. And even though, if you put this position in an engine, it doesn't give any side any advantage. It basically shows as equal. But, I think you have to take into consideration that this queen is also, exerting a certain amount of pressure on b4, and it's supporting its bishop. So perhaps you can say that white has more development over here as compared to black. And Nimzowitsch obviously didn't have the facility of engines back then he wrote my system. So yeah, white stands a bit better, I think, over here from a human point of view. So it's just got more material out in the development, more mobile material. And instead, Nimzowitsch gives a second illustration of how to play as black. I'm going to load this second illustration for you. Alright, e4, e5, the first few moves are the same. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop to c4, bishop to c5, c3 preparing for d4, knight to f6, d4, pawn takes on d4, pawn takes on d4 by white, bishop to b4, check, bishop to d2, blocking the check. And now in this position, according to the concept that we are discussing, if you would like to find the correct move, then I'll give you a few seconds again. And the move is once again to go for an exchange. You take on d2, and now knight takes on d2, and now black can play d5, pawn takes on d5, knight takes on d5, and if now white goes for the move queen to b3, black has got the strategic knight retreat move, knight to e7. And regarding this position, Nimzowitsch writes, even though white has a freer position, black with this strategic knight retreat gets a strong point on d5. And you can see this knight combined with its queen are controlling the square on d5, and black is just about to castle. And even though white has a little bit of spatial advantage over here, black is doing fine according to Nimzowitsch. So there you go. And then Nimzowitsch further writes, as we have seen, the exchange properly used furnishes an excellent weapon and forms the basis of the typical maneuvers which we analyzed above. Number 1, exchange with consequent gain of a tempo. Number 2, liquidation followed by a developing or freeing move. We must, however, give a most emphatic warning against exchanging blindly and without motive. or to move a piece several times in order thus to exchange it for an enemy piece which has not yet moved would be a thoroughly typical beginner's mistake. Therefore, only exchange in the two cases outlined above. And that is, first, if you see that you are going to gain tempos over your opponent by exchanging, then go for the exchange. And second, if you find yourself in a little bit of trouble and you see that you are the one that is going to be losing tempos and you can avoid that by exchanging material, then go for an exchange. And don't just exchange blindly. And this is something that most of us have a habit of doing, including myself. Whenever I find myself in a situation where I can't think of a better move, and I see one of my pieces has the possibility of taking my opponent's piece, I just go for the exchange, just for the heck of it. Don't do that. That is not the right way to. Alright, over here I am going to end this second part on Aron Nimzowitsch, my system. We shall continue next time from where we are leaving this. And once again, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do hit the like button. I would again request you to give some feedback on my videos, anything that can help me on improving that. I'm very new to streaming and video making, so I could use all the help I can get. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourself. Till next time.